The stagecoach ticket clutched in Delilah Dawson's trembling hand felt heavier than all her worldly possessions combined. And the pawnbroker's door had barely closed behind her before the weight of what she had done crashed down upon her chest like a fallen timber. She stood on the dusty boardwalk of Carlin, Nevada, in the blazing June heat of 1881, trying to ignore the hollow feeling where her mother's gold ring had once rested against her breastbone, suspended on a thin chain beneath her worn calico dress. The ring had been the only thing of value she owned, a delicate band etched with roses that her father had given her mother on their wedding day 20 years ago in Missouri, before the fever took them both last winter and left Delilah alone in a world that had little mercy for orphaned young women of 21. The telegram from her Aunt Margaret in San Francisco had arrived 3 weeks ago, offering Delilah a home and the possibility of work in her dressmaking shop. It was the only lifeline she had, the only family remaining, but the stagecoach fare was more money than Delilah could earn in 6 months working at the boarding house, where she scrubbed floors and changed linens for room and board. She had turned that ring over in her fingers 1,000 times, feeling the grooves her mother's fingers had worn smooth, remembering the way it caught the lamplight during evening prayers. But sentiment did not fill an empty stomach or pay for passage to a new life. Delilah walked toward the stage depot with her small carpet bag, containing 2 dresses, a hairbrush, a tintype of her parents', and the Bible her mother had taught her to read from. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the main street of Carlin, a rough mining and railroad town where she had lived for the past year after following a failed prospect with a man who had promised marriage and delivered only heartbreak. The buildings were a mixture of weathered wood and newer construction, testament to the boom the Central Pacific Railroad had brought when it pushed through a decade earlier. "Stage leaves in 20 minutes, the depot clerk announced, barely looking up from his ledger. San Francisco route, stopping in Elko, Winnemucca, Reno, then over the Sierra Nevada mountains. 4 days if the weather holds and we do not encounter trouble." Delilah nodded and took a seat on the bench outside, setting her bag between her feet. She pressed her hand to her chest where the ring should have been, and felt only the rapid beating of her heart beneath her ribs. She was doing the right thing, she told herself. Her mother would have understood. The dead had no need of gold and roses, and the living needed to survive. 3 other passengers waited for the stage. An older gentleman in a suit who looked like a traveling salesman, a severe-looking woman in black bombazine who might have been a widow or a schoolteacher, and a young man who kept checking his pocket watch with obvious impatience. None of them looked at Delilah, which suited her fine. She had learned in the past year that invisibility was often a woman's best defense in rough towns where men outnumbered women 10 to 1. The thunder of hooves announced the stagecoach's arrival from the relay station on the edge of town. The driver, a grizzled man with tobacco-stained whiskers, pulled the team to a halt with practiced efficiency. Dust billowed around the wheels as the horses stamped and blew, their coats dark with sweat. "All aboard for Points West," the driver called. "Next stop Winnemucca, overnight at the way station." Delilah gathered her bag and joined the line of passengers. She handed her ticket to the driver, who glanced at it and jerked his thumb toward the coach door. The interior was cramped and smelled of old leather and human sweat. She took a seat by the window, folding her hands in her lap as the other passengers climbed in. The severe woman sat beside her, the salesman and the impatient young man across from them. The coach lurched into motion with a crack of the driver's whip, and Carlin began to recede behind them. Delilah watched the town grow smaller through the dusty window, wondering if she would ever see it again, and finding she did not much care if she did not. There was nothing for her here but memories of loneliness, and the shame of having been foolish enough to trust a silver-tongued prospector who left her stranded when his claim played out. The landscape outside was harsh and beautiful in equal measure, miles of sagebrush and alkali flats broken by distant mountain ranges that shimmered in the heat. The coach rocked and swayed, throwing the passengers against each other with every rut in the road. No one spoke. The severe woman dozed with her head against the frame. The salesman read from a small book. The young man continued his nervous watch-checking. Delilah let her mind wander to San Francisco, a city she had never seen but imagined as a place of hills and fog and opportunity. Aunt Margaret's letters painted pictures of cable cars and grand houses, of shops filled with fabrics from China and France. Delilah's own mother had been a skilled seamstress, and she had passed some of that knowledge to her daughter during long winter evenings. Perhaps Delilah could make a real life there, learn a proper trade, become someone more than a girl who scrubbed other people's floors. The miles rolled past in a monotony of dust and heat. They stopped once to change horses at a relay station, where Delilah stepped down to stretch her legs and drink metallic-tasting water from a tin dipper. Then they were moving again, racing against the setting sun. Back in Carlin, a tall cowboy named Warren Reed pushed through the door of the pawnbroker's shop, his spurs jingling against the wooden floor. He was 25 years old, lean and weathered from years of working cattle drives from Texas to the northern ranges, with dark hair that wanted cutting and gray eyes that missed little. He had ridden into town that afternoon with a month's pay in his pocket, looking to buy a new saddle to replace the one that had cracked beyond repair during a river crossing 2 weeks back. "Help you?" the pawnbroker asked, looking up from the ring he had been examining through a jeweler's loupe. "Looking for a good saddle if you have one," Warren said, letting his eyes adjust to the dim interior. "Something that will hold up to hard use." "Might have something in the back," the pawnbroker said. "Give me a minute." Warren wandered the shop while he waited, looking at the accumulated debris of other people's desperation. Watches, guns, tools, musical instruments, all the things people pawned when they needed money more than memories. His gaze fell on the ring the pawnbroker had left on the counter, and something about it caught his attention. He picked it up, holding it to the light that filtered through the dirty window. It was a woman's ring, delicate gold with a pattern of roses etched into the band. The inside was engraved with words so small he had to squint to read them. "Thomas to Catherine, with all my love, 1861. 20 years ago." Warren turned the ring over in his calloused fingers, noting the worn places where someone had cherished it enough to wear it smooth. "That just came in," the pawnbroker said, returning with a saddle over his shoulder. "Young woman sold it not an hour ago. Pretty little thing, looked like she hated to part with it." "What did she look like?" Warren asked, not entirely sure why he cared. The pawnbroker shrugged. "Brown hair, brown eyes, thin as a rail, wearing a faded dress that had seen better days. She bought a stage-coach ticket with the money. Westbound, I heard her tell the depot clerk." Warren set the ring down and examined the saddle, testing the leather, checking the stitching. It was good quality, well maintained. They haggled briefly and settled on a price. As the pawnbroker wrapped the saddle, Warren found his eyes drawn back to the ring. "How much for that?" he asked, nodding toward it. The pawnbroker named a price that was more than fair, probably less than he had given the desperate young woman. Warren counted out the bills and added the ring to his purchases, slipping it into his vest pocket. He could not have said exactly why he bought it, only that something about the image of a woman selling her mother's wedding ring for a ticket west troubled him in a way he could not name. He carried the saddle back to the livery stable where he had left his horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Duke, who had been his companion for 3 years. As he worked the new saddle onto Duke's back, adjusting the stirrups and cinch, his hand kept straying to his vest pocket where the ring rested. Warren had been drifting since he left his family's failed farm in eastern Kansas 5 years ago. His parents were dead, his younger sisters married off to neighboring farmers, and there was nothing to hold him to land that had drunk more sweat than it ever yielded in crops. He had worked as a ranch hand, a drover, a railroad guard, following the work and the seasons. He was good with horses and cattle, reliable, not afraid of hard labor. But he had never put down roots, never found a reason to stop moving. He finished with the saddle and stood there in the fading light, one hand on Duke's warm neck, the other fingering the ring in his pocket. The westbound stage had left an hour ago, the stable boy told him when he asked. Bound for San Francisco by way of Winnemucca and Reno. 4 days of hard travel over mountain passes and through high desert. Warren had no particular business in San Francisco. He had been planning to head north toward Oregon, where he had heard there were ranches looking for experienced hands before the fall roundup. But something about that ring and the story it represented would not let him alone. A young woman desperate enough to sell her mother's wedding ring, traveling alone to a city where anything might befall her. It was none of his concern, he told himself. The world was full of people in hard circumstances, and he could not rescue them all, but the ring felt like it was burning a hole in his pocket. He led Duke out of the stable and swung into the new saddle, testing the fit. It felt good, solid, and comfortable. The bay tossed his head, ready to move after hours of standing idle. Warren sat there for a long moment, looking west toward where the stage had disappeared into the gathering dusk. "What do you think, boy?" he asked the horse. "Should we mind our own business or turn into fools?" Duke snorted and pawed the ground, which Warren took as a sign as any. He touched his spurs to the horse's flanks, and they moved out at an easy lope, following the stage road west. He would not push Duke hard in the heat, but a good horse could cover more ground than a loaded stage-coach making regular stops. If he rode through the night and caught them at the way station in Winnemucca, he could return the ring to its owner and be done with it. One good deed to balance the scales of whatever luck or providence governed his wandering life. The night settled around him as he rode, vast and star-filled. The desert cooled quickly after sunset, and Warren pulled his jacket from behind the saddle and shrugged into it. Duke settled into the steady ground eating pace that made him such a valuable trail horse, his hooves finding purchase on the rutted road even in the darkness. Warren had plenty of time to think as he rode, and he spent it wondering what kind of circumstances would drive a woman to sell something that clearly meant so much to her. The West was full of sad stories, dreams broken against the hard reality of drought and distance and bad luck. He had seen plenty of it himself, but there was something about the image of that thin young woman with her mother's ring that had gotten under his skin like a mesquite thorn. He stopped once to rest Duke and let him drink from a creek that crossed the road, then pushed on through the small hours of the morning. Dawn found them approaching Winnemucca, a larger town than Carlin, with more substantial buildings and the smell of the Humboldt River lending a green note to the sage-scented air. The way station was at the edge of town, a sprawling adobe structure built to accommodate stage passengers overnight. Warren could see the coach in the yard, the team unhitched and the driver nowhere in sight. He dismounted stiffly, his legs protesting the long night ride, and led Duke to the water trough. A hostler came out to meet him. "Help you?" "I am looking for one of the passengers who came in on that stage," Warren said. "Young woman, brown hair, traveling alone. The hostler gave him a suspicious look. "What business you got with her?" Warren pulled the ring from his pocket and held it up. "She sold this in Carlin yesterday." "I want to return it to her." The hostler's expression softened. "That is decent of you. They are all inside having breakfast before the stage leaves again. The young lady you are describing is at a table by herself near the window." Warren thanked him and handed over Duke's reins, asking the hostler to give the horse a good rub-down and some grain. Then he walked toward the way station building, suddenly aware that he had not slept or eaten in nearly 24 hours and probably looked like something that had been dragged behind a wagon. The dining room was low-ceilinged and dim, with rough-hewn tables and benches. The smell of coffee and bacon made Warren's stomach clench with hunger. He saw her immediately, sitting alone as the hostler had said, a cup of coffee before her, and a plate with a single biscuit she was eating in small, careful bites as if trying to make it last. She was indeed thin, with delicate features that might have been pretty if they were not so marked by exhaustion and worry. Her brown hair was pulled back in a simple bun, and her dress, though clean and carefully mended, had been washed so many times the pattern had nearly faded away. She looked up as Warren approached, and he saw wariness flash across her face. "Excuse me, miss," Warren said, taking off his hat. "My name is Warren Raid. I apologize for the intrusion, but I believe this belongs to you." He held out the ring, and the color drained from her face. Her hand flew to her chest, where he could now see the faint outline of a chain beneath her dress. "Where did you get that?" she whispered. "I bought it from the pawnbroker in Carlin yesterday afternoon," Warren said. "He mentioned that a young woman had just sold it to buy a stage ticket. I rode all night to catch up to you and return it." Delilah stared at the ring in his outstretched hand as if it were a ghost. "You rode all night? Why would you do such a thing?" Warren found himself without a good answer to that question. "It seemed like the right thing to do," he said finally. "A woman's mother's wedding ring is not something that should end up in a pawn shop if there is any way to prevent it." Tears welled in Delilah's eyes. She reached out slowly and took the ring from his palm, closing her fingers around it. "I do not have the money to buy it back from you," she said, her voice breaking. "I spent it all on the ticket to San Francisco." "I am not asking for money," Warren said. "I am giving it back to you. It is yours. But you paid for it. That would not be fair to you." Warren pulled out a chair and sat down across from her, setting his hat on the table. "May I ask your name?" "Delilah Dawson," she said, still clutching the ring as if afraid it might vanish. "Well, Miss Dawson, I have been working cattle drives for 5 years, and I have more money in my pocket than I need for the next month's expenses. The cost of that ring is not going to put me in the poorhouse, but I think it might mean a great deal more to you than the price of a stage ticket." Delilah looked at him properly for the first time, really seeing him. He had a kind face, she thought, weathered and honest, with eyes that looked at her directly without the calculation or hunger she had learned to fear in men's gazes. His clothes were dusty from hard riding, and exhaustion was evident in the lines around his eyes, but he sat there calmly, as if riding all night to return a ring to a stranger was the most natural thing in the world. "Why?" she asked again. "You do not know me. You do not owe me anything." Warren was quiet for a moment, turning his hat in his hands. "My mother had a locket that belonged to her mother," he said finally. "When she died, my father sold it along with most everything else to try to save the farm. It did not save anything, and he regretted that sale until the day he died. I guess I did not want you to carry that same regret." Delilah's tears spilled over, running down her cheeks. She wiped at them with the back of her hand, embarrassed to be crying in front of this stranger. "Thank you," she managed to say. "Thank you so much. You cannot know what this means to me." "You are welcome," Warren said simply. They sat in silence for a moment, and then Warren's stomach growled loudly enough that Delilah heard it. Despite her tears, she almost smiled. "Have you eaten?" she asked. "Not since yesterday morning," Warren admitted. Delilah looked at her single biscuit, then at the few coins she had left in her small purse, saved from the ring money for the meals she would need on the journey. Without hesitating, she signaled to the woman who ran the way station kitchen. "Could we have another breakfast, please? And more coffee." "I cannot let you spend your money on me," Warren protested. "You need that for your journey." "You rode all night to give me back something precious," Delilah said firmly. "The least I can do is buy you a meal, please." Warren wanted to refuse, but the smell of bacon cooking was more persuasive than his pride. "Thank you," he said. "That is kind of you." The food arrived, and they ate in companionable silence for a few minutes. Warren was so hungry he had to force himself to eat slowly, and Delilah found herself with an appetite she had not had in days. The knot of anxiety that had been sitting in her chest since she sold the ring had loosened, and she could breathe properly again. "Where are you headed?" Warren asked when he had taken the edge off his hunger. "San Francisco," Delilah said. "My aunt has a dressmaking shop there. She is the only family I have left." "That is a long journey for a woman alone." "I know." Delilah met his eyes, "but there was nothing for me in Carlin. At least in San Francisco I have a chance to build a life." Warren nodded, understanding that sentiment better than she knew. "What happened to your parents?" "Fever took them last winter in Missouri. I came west with a man who promised to marry me, but he left when his mining claim failed." She said it matter-of-factly, without self-pity, though Warren could hear the hurt beneath the words. "I have been working at a boarding house in Carlin since then, but it was barely enough to survive on. When my aunt's letter came, it felt like Providence." "Will your aunt be expecting you?" "I sent her a telegram before I left. She will meet the stage when it arrives." Warren poured himself more coffee from the pot on the table, thinking. The right thing to do would be to wish her well and ride away. He had returned the ring. His obligation, such as it was, had been fulfilled. But looking at Delilah across the table, seeing the vulnerability she tried to hide beneath a brave front, he found himself reluctant to leave her to face the rest of her journey alone. "The road between here and San Francisco can be dangerous," he said carefully. "Especially over the Sierra Nevada passes. There are road agents and worse." "The stage has a guard," Delilah said, "and other passengers." "True enough." Warren was quiet for a moment. "I was planning to head north toward Oregon, but I have no particular deadline. If you would not mind the company, I could ride along with the stage, just to make sure you reach San Francisco safely." Delilah's first instinct was to refuse. She had learned the hard way not to trust men who offered help that seemed too generous. But looking at Warren, remembering that he had ridden all night just to return her mother's ring without asking for anything in return, she found herself wanting to say yes. "I could not pay you," she said. "I have almost nothing left." "I am not asking for payment," Warren said. "Consider it a favor for a fellow traveler." Delilah studied his face, looking for signs of the ulterior motives she had learned to recognize. But she saw only honest concern and a certain weariness that matched her own. She made a decision that felt both reckless and right. "I would welcome the company," she said. "Thank you." Warren smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look younger and less careworn. "Then it is settled. I will need to get a few hours of sleep before we leave, and my horse needs rest too, but we can catch up to the stage at the next relay station." The way station manager agreed to rent Warren a room for the morning, and he excused himself to get some much-needed sleep. Delilah sat alone in the dining room, the ring now back on its chain around her neck where it belonged, and tried to understand what had just happened. A stranger had ridden through the night to return something precious to her, asking nothing in return, and was now planning to escort her safely to San Francisco purely out of kindness. It seemed too good to be true, and yet the ring resting against her heart was proof that it had happened. Delilah pulled it out from beneath her dress and looked at it in the morning light streaming through the window. The etched roses caught the sun, and she could read her father's message to her mother inside the band. Thomas to Catherine, with all my love. They had loved each other truly, her parents, through hard times and good. Her mother used to say that real love was not about grand gestures, but about showing up day after day, doing what needed to be done. Delilah thought about Warren Reed riding all night on her behalf, and wondered if that counted as a grand gesture or just showing up. Either way, it had moved something deep inside her chest, a feeling she had thought dead after the prospector's betrayal. Not love, certainly not yet, but maybe hope. Hope that there were still good people in the world. Hope that not all men made promises they did not keep. The stage departed on schedule at mid-morning, and Delilah climbed aboard with the other passengers, who were bleary-eyed and complaining about the hard beds at the way station. She took her place by the window again and settled in for another day of dust and heat and bone-jarring progress westward. Warren woke 4 hours later feeling more human, though he could have slept for a week. He checked on Duke, who had been well tended by the hostler and was rested enough for the road ahead. Warren saddled him and rode out, following the stage route at an easy pace that would not tax the horse. He caught up to the coach at a relay station in the late afternoon, where the driver was changing teams. Delilah saw him ride in and felt an unexpected surge of relief. Part of her had wondered if he would actually follow through on his promise, or if she had dreamed the whole encounter. Over the next 3 days, a pattern established itself. Warren rode alongside or behind the stage, stopping at the relay stations when they stopped, camping nearby when the coach halted for the night. He did not force his company on Delilah, but made himself available, helping her down from the coach when it stopped, carrying her bag when they reached the overnight stations, sitting with her at meals when she invited him to join her. They talked during those meals, sharing pieces of their lives in the careful way of people getting to know each other. Warren told her about growing up on a Kansas farm, about the relentless work, and the way the land seemed to take everything and give back nothing. He told her about his first cattle drive at 18, the terror and exhilaration of pushing 1,000 head of longhorns from Texas to Dodge City, sleeping on the ground under stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. Delilah told him about her childhood in Missouri, about learning to sew at her mother's knee, about the little town where everyone knew everyone else's business. She told him about the fever that swept through one winter, taking both her parents within days of each other, about the loneliness of being suddenly alone in the world at 20 years old. She told him, with some embarrassment, about the prospector who had seemed so charming and sincere, who had promised her a future and delivered only abandonment. He was a fool, Warren said when she finished that story. Any man who would walk away from you is a damn fool. Delilah felt heat rise in her cheeks. You barely know me. I know you sold your most precious possession to build a better life instead of giving up. I know you spent your last money to buy breakfast for a stranger. Those things tell me you are brave and kind, and those are not common qualities. Their conversations grew longer and more personal as the miles rolled past. Warren found himself watching for Delilah's smile, which appeared more frequently as she relaxed in his company. Delilah found herself thinking about Warren during the long hours in the coach, wondering about his life, his dreams, what made him laugh. On the third night, they stayed at a way station in Reno, at the base of the Sierra Nevada mountains. The next day would be the hardest part of the journey, climbing over the passes that separated Nevada from California. The station keeper warned them that there had been rockslides on the road and to expect delays. That evening, Delilah and Warren sat on the porch of the way station, watching the sun set behind the mountains they would cross tomorrow. The air was cooler here, pine-scented, a relief after the alkali desert. "Are you nervous about tomorrow?" Warren asked. "A little," Delilah admitted. "I have never seen mountains like these before." "They are something," Warren agreed. "Beautiful and dangerous in equal measure." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the evening, crickets singing, horses moving in the corral, the distant call of a night bird. "Can I ask you something?" Delilah said. "Of course." "Why are you really doing this? Riding all the way to San Francisco with me?" Warren considered the question carefully. "Honestly, I am not entirely sure. At first it was just about returning the ring. But then I met you, and there was something about you that made me want to help. And the more time I spend in your company, the more I realize I am not ready for this journey to end." Delilah's heart beat faster. "What do you mean?" Warren turned to look at her, his gray eyes serious in the fading light. "I mean that somewhere between Carlin and here, I started falling for you, Delilah Dawson. I know it is foolish, I know it is fast, but there it is." Delilah did not know what to say. Part of her wanted to run, to protect herself from the possibility of being hurt again. But a larger part of her, the part that had been dormant since her parents' deaths, wanted to lean into this feeling, to trust this man who had shown her nothing but kindness. "I am afraid," she said quietly. "The last time I trusted a man, he left me stranded and alone." "I know," Warren said. "And I cannot promise I will never hurt you or disappoint you, because I am human and flawed. But I can promise I will never lie to you or leave you without good reason. I can promise to show up day after day and do my best to be worthy of whatever trust you might give me." Delilah thought about her mother's ring, about the inscription inside it. "With all my love." Love was a risk always, but maybe the risk was worth taking. "I think I am falling for you too," she said, the words coming out barely above a whisper. "And that terrifies me." Warren reached over and took her hand, his rough palm warm against hers. "We do not have to rush anything. We have time." They sat there holding hands as the stars came out, one by one, filling the sky with cold fire. Delilah felt something settle inside her, a sense of rightness she had not experienced in longer than she could remember. Whatever happened next, whatever waited for them in San Francisco, she was not alone. The next morning they began the climb into the mountains. The road wound upward in steep switchbacks, the coach lurching and groaning with the effort. Outside the windows, the landscape transformed from sage and sand to pine forests and granite cliffs. Warren rode close to the coach, alert for any signs of trouble. The rockslide the station keeper had warned about appeared mid-afternoon, a jumble of boulders blocking half the road. The driver pulled the team to a halt and climbed down to assess the situation, cursing steadily under his breath. "We are going to have to clear enough of this to get through," he announced to the passengers. "All able-bodied men, I could use your help." Warren dismounted and joined the driver and the other male passengers in moving rocks. It was hot, exhausting work, and they had to be careful not to trigger another slide. Delilah watched from the coach window, her heart in her throat every time Warren hefted a particularly large boulder. It took 2 hours to clear a path wide enough for the coach. The men were sweating and filthy by the time they finished, their hands scraped and bleeding. The driver declared a rest stop to let everyone recover, and the horses catch their breath before attempting the passage. Delilah climbed down from the coach and went to Warren, who was washing his hands in a canteen. "Are you all right?" just some scrapes," Warren said. "Nothing serious." Delilah pulled a handkerchief from her bag and tore it into strips, using them to bind the worst of the cuts on his hands. Her touch was gentle, careful, and Warren found himself watching her face as she worked, noting the concentration in her brown eyes, the way she bit her lower lip when she focused. "Thank you," he said when she finished. "Thank you for helping clear the road," Delilah replied. "We would have been stuck here all night otherwise." They made it through the rockslide area without incident and continued climbing. As the sun began to set, they reached the summit of the pass, and the view took Delilah's breath away. Below them, California spread out in folds of green and gold with the suggestion of the distant ocean beyond. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "Look," Warren said, pointing, "that is your new home." "It is incredible," Delilah breathed. The descent was faster than the climb, and as darkness fell, they reached a way station on the California side of the mountains. They would reach Sacramento the next day and San Francisco the day after that. The journey was almost over. That realization sat heavy in Delilah's chest as she and Warren shared dinner in the way station's dining room. She had grown so accustomed to his presence over the past days that the thought of saying goodbye in San Francisco felt unbearable. "What will you do when we reach the city?" she asked. Warren had been thinking about that question himself. "I suppose I will look for work. There are always ranches hiring. Or maybe I will try something different. I have been drifting for 5 years. Maybe it is time to put down some roots." "Where would you put them down?" Warren met her eyes across the table. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether you want me to stay in San Francisco or move on." Delilah's heart hammered against her ribs. "I cannot ask you to change your plans for me. We have only known each other a few days." "You are not asking, I am offering." Warren reached across the table and took her hand. "I know this is fast, Delilah. I know we should probably take more time, be more cautious. But I have spent 5 years being cautious, keeping myself from getting attached to anyone or anywhere. I am tired of it. I know what I feel and I know what I want. The question is, what do you want?" Delilah looked at their joined hands, thinking about the risk and the fear and the hope all tangled together in her chest. She thought about her mother's ring and the message inside it, "With all my love." Her parents had been brave enough to love each other. Maybe she could be brave too. "I want you to stay," she said. "I want to see where this goes. I want to take that risk with you." Warren's face broke into a smile that made him look like a different person, younger and unguarded. "Then I will stay. I will find work in San Francisco, and we will court properly, and we will see where this takes us." They sat there grinning at each other like fools, and Delilah felt happiness bubble up inside her like a spring. It was terrifying and wonderful all at once. The next day they reached Sacramento, a bustling city that made Carlin look like a whistle stop. The stage stopped for several hours while the driver dealt with cargo and mail, and Warren suggested they use the time to walk around the city. They strolled through streets lined with shops and hotels, past the grand buildings that spoke of California's wealth and ambition. Warren bought Delilah lunch at a proper restaurant with white tablecloths and food served on real china. It felt like a date, like the beginning of something real and lasting. "I could get used to this," Delilah said, savoring a piece of apple pie that tasted better than anything she had eaten in months. "Good," Warren said, "because I plan to take you to many more restaurants if you will let me." That evening they boarded the stage for the final leg of the journey to San Francisco. Delilah felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She would finally meet her Aunt Margaret, begin her new life in the city. And Warren would be there with her, not as a temporary companion but as something more. They talked late into the night as the coach rolled westward, sharing dreams and fears, making plans for the future. Warren told her about his hope to eventually own his own ranch, a small place where he could raise horses. Delilah told him about her desire to become a skilled dressmaker, maybe even open her own shop someday. "We could do both," Warren said. "A ranch within riding distance of the city, so you could have your shop and I could have my horses." "That sounds perfect," Delilah said, and meant it. Dawn found them approaching San Francisco, and Delilah pressed her face to the window, eager for her first glimpse of the city. It appeared gradually, hills rising from the fog, buildings climbing impossibly steep streets, the glitter of the bay beyond. It was everything she had imagined and more. The stage pulled into the depot in mid-morning, and Delilah's nervousness returned in full force. What if her aunt did not like her? What if the promised job fell through? What if she had made a terrible mistake in coming here? Warren seemed to sense her anxiety. He helped her down from the coach and stood close, a steadying presence. "It will be all right," he said quietly. "You are going to be fine." "Delilah Dawson." Delilah turned to see a woman approaching, middle-aged and handsome, with brown hair streaked with gray and a kind face that reminded Delilah painfully of her mother. She wore a well-made dress of dark blue fabric and carried herself with the confidence of someone who knew her place in the world. "Aunt Margaret," Delilah said. "Oh, my dear girl." Margaret enveloped Delilah in a hug that smelled of lavender and felt like coming home. "I am so glad you are here safely. Let me look at you." She held Delilah at arm's length, her eyes misting. "You look so much like your mother. Catherine would be so proud of you for making this journey." Delilah felt tears prick her own eyes. "Thank you for taking me in." "I know it is an imposition." "Nonsense. You are family, and family takes care of each other." Margaret's eyes moved to Warren, who stood a respectful distance away holding Duke's reins. "And who is this?" "This is Warren Reed," Delilah said. "He helped me on my journey here." Margaret's eyebrows rose, and Delilah could see her taking in the situation, drawing conclusions. "Helped you how?" Warren stepped forward and removed his hat. "Pleased to meet you, madam. I escorted your niece from Nevada to make sure she arrived safely." "The roads can be dangerous for a woman traveling alone." "I see." Margaret's tone was neutral, but her eyes were sharp as she assessed Warren. "That was very kind of you, Mr. Reed. Will you be staying in San Francisco?" "That is my intention, yes, madam. I plan to look for work here." "Aunt Margaret, there is something you should know," Delilah said. She pulled the ring out from beneath her dress, where it hung on its chain. "I had to sell Mother's ring to buy the stage ticket. Warren bought it from the pawnbroker and rode all night to return it to me. He asked for nothing in return." Margaret's expression softened as she looked at the ring, then back at Warren. "That speaks well of your character, Mr. Reed. My sister treasured that ring." She paused, then seemed to come to a decision. "Are you hungry? Why do you not join us for luncheon, and we can discuss your plans?" Over lunch at Margaret's comfortable home in a respectable neighborhood, the full story came out. Delilah told her aunt about the past year, about the prospector's betrayal and the hard work at the boarding house. She told her about selling the ring and Warren's unexpected kindness. And she told her, with some trepidation, about the feelings that had developed between them during the journey. Margaret listened to it all without interrupting, her face thoughtful. When Delilah finished, she turned to Warren. "What are your intentions toward my niece, Mr. Reed?" Warren did not flinch from the direct question. "Honorable ones, madam. I would like permission to court her properly, with the goal of marriage if she will have me." "Marriage is a serious commitment," Margaret said. "How do you plan to support a wife? Do you have savings? Prospects?" "I have some savings from 5 years of ranch work," Warren said. "I am good with horses and cattle, and I am not afraid of hard work. I know I am not much of a catch right now, but I am reliable and I treat people fairly. I will do right by Delilah if she gives me the chance." Margaret studied him for a long moment. "My niece has had a hard year, Mr. Reed. I will not see her hurt again." "Neither will I, madam. That is why I am being honest about what I can offer. It would not be an easy life at first, but I would work hard to build something better." Margaret nodded slowly. "I appreciate your honesty. Here is what I propose. Delilah will live with me and work in my shop while you establish yourself in San Francisco. If after 6 months you are both still of the same mind, we can discuss marriage plans. Does that seem reasonable?" Delilah looked at Warren, trying to read his reaction. 6 months felt like an eternity, but it was also sensible. They did need time to be sure of their feelings, and Warren needed time to establish himself. "That seems more than fair," Warren said. "Thank you for giving me a chance." "Do not thank me yet," Margaret said with a slight smile. "My sister married for love, and I saw how happy it made her, even when times were hard. If you can make Delilah half as happy as Thomas made Catherine, then you will have my blessing. But you will have to prove yourself first." So began the strangest and most wonderful 6 months of Delilah's life. She moved into Margaret's comfortable home, a 2-story house with a sewing room on the ground floor where the dressmaking business operated. Margaret proved to be an excellent teacher and a kind guardian, treating Delilah more like a daughter than a niece. The work was hard but satisfying. Delilah's skills improved rapidly under Margaret's instruction, and she discovered she had a good eye for color and design. The clients were mostly wealthy women from the better neighborhoods, and Delilah learned the skill of fitting and flattering difficult figures while maintaining diplomacy. Warren found work at a livery stable on the edge of town, caring for horses and driving wagons for deliveries. The pay was modest but steady, and the stable owner, a gruff Irishman named O'Brien, appreciated Warren's skill with difficult horses. Warren rented a room in a boarding house and saved every penny he could, planning for the future. Every Sunday, Margaret allowed Warren to call on Delilah, and they spent the afternoon together, walking through the city or sitting in Margaret's parlor talking. Warren was always perfectly proper, never overstepping the bounds of propriety, which somehow made Delilah want him more. He brought her small gifts, a ribbon for her hair, a book of poetry, wildflowers picked from the hills outside the city. They talked about everything and nothing, learning each other's minds and hearts. Warren told her about his dreams for a ranch, describing it in such detail that Delilah could picture it perfectly. A small valley with good grass and water, a house with a porch where they could sit in the evenings, a barn for horses and maybe a milk cow. Delilah told him about the dresses she wanted to make, fine gowns for grand occasions, but also practical clothing for working women who needed garments that would last. She told him about her idea for ready-made dresses in standard sizes, which could be sold at lower prices than custom work. "You are going to be very successful," Warren said one Sunday as they walked along the waterfront, watching ships come and go in the bay. "I can see it. Your own shop, your name over the door. And you will have your ranch," Delilah said. "Maybe we can do both. I could make dresses and you could raise horses, and we could build a life that includes both our dreams." "I like the sound of that," Warren said. He stopped walking and turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I love you, Delilah. I have known it for months, but I wanted to wait for the right moment to say it. I love you, and I want to build that life with you." Delilah's heart felt too big for her chest. "I love you too, Warren. I think I have loved you since you rode all night to return my mother's ring." They stood there on the waterfront, holding hands and grinning at each other, while the fog rolled in from the bay and gulls cried overhead. It was not a grand moment, Not the sort of thing that would go in storybooks, but it was real and it was theirs. The 6 months passed both quickly and slowly. Delilah counted the days while also losing herself in the rhythm of work and courtship. She grew close to her aunt, who shared stories about Delilah's mother that made her feel connected to her lost parents. Margaret told her about growing up with Catherine, about their own mother who had taught them both to sew, about the adventures they had shared before life took them in different directions. Warren proved himself reliable in exactly the way he had promised. He showed up when he said he would. He worked hard and saved his money. He treated Delilah with respect and affection in equal measure. Margaret's initial caution gradually transformed into approval, and then genuine fondness for the serious young man courting her niece. 3 months into the arrangement, Warren came to Sunday dinner with news. "O'Brien is retiring," he said. "He has offered to sell me the livery stable at a price I can almost afford. If I use my savings and take a small loan, I can buy it." "That is wonderful," Delilah said. "Your own business." "It is a big risk," Warren said. "But O'Brien thinks I can make a go of it, and it would provide a steady income enough to support a family eventually." Margaret, who had been listening from her chair by the fire, spoke up. "How much do you need for the loan?" Warren named the figure and Margaret nodded thoughtfully. "I could lend you that amount, at fair interest, of course. I am a businesswoman, after all." Warren looked stunned. "Madam, I could not ask you to do that." "You did not ask, I am offering. You have proven yourself to be hardworking and honest, and I believe you will succeed. Besides, it is in my interest to ensure my future nephew-in-law can provide for my niece." "Future nephew-in-law," Warren repeated, hope lighting his face. Margaret smiled. "I am not blind, young man. I can see how you two look at each other. If you want to marry Delilah after the 6 months are up, you will have my blessing." Delilah jumped up and hugged her aunt. Thank you so much." "Do not thank me yet," Margaret said dryly. "You still have to live with the man. That is when you discover all his annoying habits." Warren bought the livery stable and threw himself into making it successful. He expanded the services to include buying and selling horses, not just boarding them. His reputation for honest dealing spread, and business grew. He hired 2 men to help with the daily work, which allowed him to focus on the buying and selling that brought in better profits. Delilah continued to develop her skills as a dressmaker, and Margaret began to trust her with some of their more important clients. When Mrs. Ashford, one of San Francisco's society leaders, came in for a gown for the governor's ball, Margaret put Delilah in charge of the project. The dress was a triumph of ivory silk and Belgian lace, and Mrs. Ashford was so delighted she recommended Margaret's shop to all her friends. The 6-month mark arrived on a foggy November morning. Warren came to Sunday dinner as usual, but this time he brought something extra. When the meal was finished and they moved to the parlor, he knelt down in front of Delilah and pulled a small box from his pocket. "Delilah Dawson, you are the bravest, kindest, most wonderful woman I have ever known. You make me want to be a better man. You make me believe in the future. Will you marry me?" He opened the box to reveal a ring, a simple band of gold with a small diamond. It was modest compared to the jewelry worn by Margaret's wealthy clients, but to Delilah it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you." Warren slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly. They kissed then, their first real kiss, and it felt like coming home and setting out on an adventure all at the same time. Margaret dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. "Well, I suppose we have a wedding to plan." They were married on a bright day in January of 1882, in a small church with Margaret and Warren's friends from the livery stable as witnesses. Delilah wore a dress she had made herself, ivory satin with touches of lace, and she carried a bouquet of winter roses. Around her neck she wore her mother's ring on its chain, and on her finger she wore Warren's ring, two symbols of two different kinds of love. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. When the minister asked if they would love and honor each other all the days of their lives, they answered together, their voices strong and sure. Warren kissed his bride, and Delilah felt her heart could not hold any more joy. They held a modest reception at Margaret's house, with food and music and toasts to the happy couple. O'Brien got slightly drunk and told embarrassing stories about Warren's early days at the livery stable. Margaret's friends from the dressmaking business teased Delilah about being too beautiful for such a lucky man. Through it all, Warren and Delilah stood together, his arm around her waist, her hand in his, grinning like fools. As the sun set and the guests began to leave, Margaret pulled Delilah aside. "Your mother would have been so happy to see this day," she said. "You have chosen well, my dear. That young man loves you truly." "I know," Delilah said. "I am very lucky." "Luck has nothing to do with it," Margaret said firmly. "You were brave enough to take a chance and wise enough to recognize a good man when you found one. That is not luck. That is wisdom." Warren had found them a small house not far from the livery stable, 2 rooms and a kitchen with a yard where Delilah could plant a garden. It was not grand, but it was theirs, and Delilah had never been happier than the day Warren carried her over the threshold. Their first year of marriage was hard work and simple pleasures. Warren built the livery business while Delilah continued working for Margaret 3 days a week, learning everything she could about running a business. In the evenings, they sat together in their small parlor, Warren reading the newspaper while Delilah sewed, their feet touching under the table. They talked about their dreams, making plans for the future. Warren wanted to save enough to buy land for that ranch he had described. Delilah wanted to eventually open her own shop, maybe hire girls like herself who needed a trade and a chance. In the spring of 1883, Delilah discovered she was pregnant. Warren was thrilled, though terrified at the prospect of being a father. They spent the summer preparing, Warren building a cradle in the stable workshop, Delilah sewing tiny gowns and blankets. Margaret was delighted at the prospect of being a great aunt and showered them with gifts and advice. Their son was born in November, a healthy baby with Warren's gray eyes and Delilah's brown hair. They named him Thomas, after Delilah's father, and he was the most perfect thing either of them had ever seen. Watching Warren hold their son for the first time, seeing the wonder and love on his face, Delilah felt her heart overflow. This was what her mother had known, this fierce protective love for her child and the man who had given him to her. This was what the inscription in the ring meant. "With all my love." The years rolled past in a happy blur of hard work and family. Warren's livery business continued to grow, and eventually he was able to buy a parcel of land in the hills south of the city, 20 acres with a creek running through it. He built a house there, bigger than their first home, with a porch where they could sit in the evenings and watch the sun set over the valley. Delilah opened her own dressmaking shop when Thomas was 3, with Margaret's help and blessing. She hired 2 young women to help with the sewing and specialized in quality clothing at reasonable prices for working women. The shop was successful beyond her expectations, and she was proud to be building something of her own. Their daughter was born 2 years after Thomas, a tiny fierce thing they named Catherine after Delilah's mother. She had Warren's stubbornness and Delilah's creativity, and she kept them on their toes from the moment she learned to walk. Warren never did become a big rancher with thousands of head of cattle. He kept his livery business in the city and raised horses on the ranch, breeding and training quality animals that sold for good prices. It was exactly what he had dreamed about during those long years of drifting, a place of his own where he could put down roots. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Warren gave Delilah a locket on a gold chain. Inside were tiny photographs of their children, Thomas now 9 years old and Catherine 7. "I know it is not as fine as some of the jewelry you see in the city," he said, "but I wanted you to have something special." "It is perfect," Delilah said, tears in her eyes. "But you have already given me everything I could want." "Have I?" Warren pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "Sometimes I think about that day in Winnemucca when I gave you back the ring. What would have happened if I had not ridden after the stage? Where would we both be now?" "I do not know," Delilah said, "but I thank God every day that you did. You changed my whole life, Warren Reed." "You changed mine too," Warren said. "I was just drifting before I met you, no purpose, no home. You gave me a reason to stop running and start building." They stood there in the parlor of their ranch house, holding each other while their children played outside and the horses moved in the pasture beyond. It was an ordinary moment in an ordinary day, but it contained everything that mattered. Margaret visited often, delighting in her role as doting aunt to Thomas and Catherine. She had sold her dressmaking business and retired comfortably, spending her time traveling and spoiling her young relatives. She often told people the story of how Warren had ridden through the night to return a ring to a stranger, and how that one act of kindness had changed 3 lives. As the children grew, Delilah told them about their grandparents, keeping alive the memory of Thomas and Catherine Dawson. She showed them the ring with the roses etched in gold, the inscription inside that had lasted 20 years and would last 20 more. She told them about selling it in Carlin and about the cowboy who brought it back. Thomas and Catherine loved the story, begging to hear it over and over. To them, it was a fairy tale, magical and romantic. But to Delilah, it was simply the truth of how she had found her way home. Warren expanded the ranch gradually, buying adjoining parcels when they became available. He taught Thomas to ride almost before the boy could walk, and Catherine proved to be a natural with horses, fearless and skilled. They were good children, happy and healthy, and Warren and Delilah counted their blessings every day. In 1891, when Thomas was 8 and preparing for his first cattle drive with his father, Warren took him aside for a serious talk. "Your mother and I want you to understand something important," he said. "We are not wealthy people, not like some of the families in San Francisco. But we have something more valuable than money. We have each other, and we have this land, and we have our good names. Those things are worth protecting and fighting for." "I understand, Pa," Thomas said seriously. "Your mother sold her most precious possession to build a better life," Warren continued. "She was brave enough to take that risk, and I was lucky enough to find her and return what she had lost. That is how our family began, with an act of sacrifice and an act of kindness. I want you to remember that. The way we treat people matters. The choices we make matter." Thomas nodded, absorbing the lesson. He would remember that conversation for the rest of his life and pass the story down to his own children someday. Catherine, though younger, was equally affected by her parents' story. She grew up with a fierce belief in true love and the importance of kindness. She would eventually marry a doctor and work alongside him, treating patients in the rough mining towns that still dotted the Nevada hills. She carried her grandmother's ring on a chain around her neck, just as her mother had, a reminder of where she came from. The years passed peacefully. Warren's hair went gray at the temples, and Delilah found laugh lines around her eyes when she looked in the mirror. But they were happy lines, earned through years of smiling and laughter. Their love, which had begun so quickly and unexpectedly, had deepened and strengthened with time. They still sat on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the valley. Warren would reach over and take Delilah's hand, and they would sit in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling down for the night. Sometimes they talked about the early days, remembering the stagecoach journey and those first uncertain months in San Francisco. "Do you ever regret it?" Warren asked one evening. "Giving up the city to live out here?" "Never," Delilah said without hesitation. "This is exactly where I want to be." Margaret passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1895 at the age of 68. Delilah mourned her deeply, grateful for the years they had together, and the second chance her aunt had given her. In her will, Margaret left Delilah her house in San Francisco and a sum of money that allowed Delilah to expand her dressmaking business significantly. Delilah used the inheritance to open a training program for young women who wanted to learn dressmaking, offering them the same opportunity Margaret had given her. She hired instructors and set up a boarding house where the students could live while they learned. It was her way of honoring her aunt's memory and passing forward the kindness that had changed her life. Thomas grew into a fine young man, tall and strong like his father, with the same gray eyes and steady character. He took over more and more of the ranch work as Warren's back began to protest the hard labor of horse training. Thomas had his father's gift with animals and his mother's head for business, and under his management, the ranch continued to prosper. Catherine married her doctor in 1898, and Warren walked her down the aisle with tears in his eyes, remembering the tiny baby who had grown into this beautiful, capable woman. The wedding was held at the ranch, with guests from all over California and Nevada. It was a grand celebration that lasted 3 days, with music and dancing and enough food to feed an army. As Warren and Delilah watched their daughter dance with her new husband, Warren leaned over and whispered in his wife's ear, "We did all right, did we not?" "We did better than all right," Delilah said. "We did wonderful." More grandchildren followed. Thomas married a sweet girl from Sacramento named Mary, and they gave Warren and Delilah 3 grandchildren in quick succession. Catherine and her doctor husband had 2 children, a boy and a girl. The ranch house filled with the sounds of children's laughter during visits, and Warren built a swing in the big oak tree by the creek. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1907, their children threw them a party at the ranch. Friends and family came from all over to celebrate, and there were speeches and toasts and a beautiful cake. But the best moment came at the end of the evening when everyone had gone home and Warren and Delilah sat alone on their porch, watching the stars come out. 25 years, Delilah said wonderingly. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that we met, and sometimes it feels like we have always been together. I would not change a single day of it, Warren said. Well, maybe that time I got kicked by the sorrel stallion. I could have done without that. Delilah laughed. You were limping for a month. I kept telling you that horse was mean. You were right, as usual. Warren pulled her close. Thank you for 25 years of being right. And thank you for 25 years of putting up with me being right. They sat there wrapped in each other's arms, the same way they had sat on a porch in Reno all those years ago when they were young and just beginning. The feelings had not changed, only deepened. The love that had sparked in a way station dining room had grown into something vast and enduring, a foundation that had supported them through joy and sorrow, triumph and setback. Warren thought about the ring he had bought from a pawnbroker in Carlin, the impulsive decision that had changed his life. He had spent the years before meeting Delilah drifting without purpose, taking each day as it came. But that one choice to ride after the stage, to return something precious to a stranger, had given him everything that mattered. A home, a family, a reason to wake up grateful each morning. Delilah thought about the desperate moment when she had sold her mother's ring, believing she would never see it again. She had been so alone then, so afraid of the future. But that act of sacrifice had led her to Warren, to this life, to a happiness she had not imagined possible. Her mother's ring still hung around her neck, warm against her skin, a reminder of where she had come from and how far she had traveled. As they grew older, Warren and Delilah gradually turned more of the ranch operations over to Thomas, while they enjoyed a well-earned rest. They spent their days quietly, tending Delilah's garden, watching the grandchildren play, sitting on the porch and remembering. They had worked hard and built something lasting, and now they could simply enjoy being together. Warren's hair went completely white, and Delilah's brown locks turned silver. Their hands became gnarled with arthritis, and their steps grew slower. But they still held hands on their evening walks, still kissed each other goodnight, still looked at each other with the same love that had brought them together nearly 4 decades earlier. In the spring of 1920, they celebrated their 38th wedding anniversary with their children and grandchildren around them. Thomas was now a grandfather himself, with a son old enough to help run the ranch. Catherine's children were grown and pursuing their own dreams. The family that had begun with a cowboy returning a ring to a desperate young woman had grown into something beautiful and lasting. Warren's health began to fail that summer. Nothing dramatic, just the slow wearing down of a body that had worked hard for 7 decades. Delilah nursed him carefully, reading to him on the porch, making his favorite foods, sitting by his bedside through long nights when sleep would not come. "I am not afraid," Warren told her one night when the pain was bad. "I have lived a good life, more than I deserved." "Do not talk like that," Delilah said fiercely. "You deserve every bit of happiness we have had." "I have no regrets," Warren continued, "except that I will have to leave you eventually. That is the only thing I hate about dying." "Then do not do it for a good long while yet," Delilah said, tears streaming down her face. "We still have time." And they did have time, more than they feared but less than they wanted. Warren rallied with the cooler fall weather and was able to enjoy Thanksgiving with the whole family gathered at the ranch. He sat at the head of the long table, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and felt his heart full to bursting with gratitude. "I want to tell you all something," he said when the meal was finished. "Your grandmother and I began our life together because of a ring and a stagecoach and an impulsive decision to ride through the night. We were young and foolish and had no idea what we were doing. But we loved each other, and we built this family through that love. Whatever challenges you face in your lives, remember that love is what matters. Love and kindness and showing up for each other day after day. That is the real treasure." There was not a dry eye in the room when he finished. Delilah reached over and squeezed his hand, and he squeezed back, their fingers intertwined as they had been for nearly 4 decades. Warren passed away peacefully in his sleep that December, with Delilah holding his hand. He was 70 years old, and he died in the house he had built, surrounded by the family he had created, having lived a life full of purpose and love. Delilah mourned him deeply, but she did not break. She was 81 years old and had weathered too many storms to be destroyed by even this greatest loss. She lived on at the ranch, cared for by Thomas and his family, spending her days in the garden and with her grandchildren. She wore 2 rings now, her mother's on a chain around her neck and Warren's wedding band on a chain beside it. She would touch them sometimes, remembering. Thomas and Catherine, Warren and Delilah, Two love stories separated by a generation but connected by a golden band etched with roses. On quiet evenings, she would sit on the porch where she and Warren had spent so many hours together, and she would talk to him as if he were still there. She told him about the grandchildren's accomplishments, about the ranch news, about the world that kept changing without him. And sometimes, when the wind blew just right and the stars were bright overhead, she could almost feel him there beside her, his hand in hers. Delilah lived to be 93 years old, sharp-minded and gentle-spirited until the end. She passed away in 1932, surrounded by 4 generations of family, having lived to see the world transform in ways she never imagined. Automobiles and airplanes, telephones and electric lights, a whole new century unfolding. But through all those changes, one thing remained constant. The love story that began in a dusty Nevada town in 1881, when a young woman sold her most precious possession, and a cowboy rode through the night to return it. That story lived on in the family they created, passed down through generations, a reminder that sometimes the most important journeys begin with a single act of kindness. Thomas inherited the ranch and his mother's rings, and he gave them to his own daughter when she married, continuing the tradition. The rings passed through the family, generation after generation, along with the story of Delilah and Warren and how they found each other. And if you visit that valley south of San Francisco today, you can still see the old ranch house with its wide porch, though it is a museum now, preserved as a historic site. Visitors come to hear the story of the cowboy and the ring, of the brave young woman and the man who loved her enough to ride through the night. The house is filled with artifacts from their lives. Warren's first saddle, carefully preserved. Delilah's sewing basket with her best scissors and thread. Photographs of the family through the years, showing how 2 desperate people created something beautiful and lasting. And in a place of honor, protected in a glass case, are the 2 rings. Catherine's wedding band with its etched roses and loving inscription, and the simple gold band Warren gave Delilah on their wedding day. Visitors press close to the glass, reading the words engraved inside the first ring. Thomas to Catherine, with all my love, 1861. And then they read the inscription Warren had added to his own ring, etched on the inside so only Delilah would see it. With all my love always. 2 rings, 2 love stories, 1 family. A legacy built on sacrifice and kindness, courage and devotion. A reminder that the greatest treasures in life are not the things we own, but the people we love and the families we build together. The museum guide always ends the tour with the same words. Delilah Dawson sold her mother's ring for a ticket to a new life. Warren Reed found that ring and brought it back to her. In doing so, he gave her something far more precious than gold. He gave her a future, a family, and a love that lasted a lifetime. And that, more than any treasure, is what makes their story worth remembering. And visitors leave the museum with tears in their eyes and warmth in their hearts, carrying with them the story of 2 ordinary people who lived an extraordinary love. A love that began with a ring and a stagecoach, and a cowboy brave enough to follow his heart through the wild Nevada night.